So today we're going to look at a rather broad subject. It's going to take us from the beginning of humanity to today, not to today, the beginning of humanity to about 2,000 years ago, more or less. And it's the subject of how science got started. But first, before we do that, have you got any questions from last time? You should. You're supposed to think deeply about all this stuff and begin to wonder about it. It's supposed to trigger some questions that you probably have had and never thought anyone was going to ask you to think about. Because
So we were talking about how, should a lot of things on the internet be free?
Yeah.
We were saying kind of we're used to a lot of things being free on the internet, and then I was thinking a lot of the reasons why we have free access to so many things is because of advertisements.
Yeah.
But if advertisements are making things free, eventually they might start to change the content of what's available.
Well, they're already doing that.
Sure.
Yeah. And so that was just something I was thinking about, is how that affects content of what you're looking at.
I'm sure it does. Advertisers will advertise for things that they want to advertise for. I look at Google News and there's ads placed within the articles in Google News. It's just a convenient place to read the news. Yeah.
Not only throughout, well, not only the pop in like that, but literally in the content itself, they sneak it in sometimes too.
Oh,
It's called
yeah.
sponsored articles, sponsored content,
Mhm.
where they
Yeah.
literally just write an article for an advertisement.
Yeah.
And maybe wording the content differently for more shock values, so you get more clicks and more views.
It could well be. As we said in Thursday's discussion, there's nothing in the world that's free. Free is the best, but it doesn't happen. My son points out that, cheap is good, cheaper is better, and free is best. But there's nothing that's free except what I choose to give him, and then it's my money. But that's a very good point. There's somebody paying for it somehow, and that means you're paying for it because you're going to buy their product. Will they control the content? I don't know, but certain newspapers that you buy, they slant their content to what their advertisers will pay for. I mean, I can't imagine certain advertisers paying the New York Times to put in left-leaning articles if those advertisers really feel that it should be a right-leaning newspaper. It doesn't work that way. You could see that in any sort of place. But you do raise a point. You're going to have to keep your eyes open and expect that things are going to be biased by the advertisers, for sure. Anyone else?
Yeah. That task that you gave us, that light phone that maybe comes to the door.
Oh yes, let's talk about that.
Whether it is intelligent or not. I think it's a very complicated question to answer, because we are even here in the organisms on the planet, we are struggling as well to actually say, is that dog actually intelligent? And then we have all these different measures of it, putting a mirror there, does it have self-awareness or whatever. It's already really hard for organisms here, we more or less can say something about it. But then if we have a creature from that is somewhere completely different, do we see do we know how it actually interacts with us? How does it see? We sent that disc up in 77 or so with these pictures of isn't it the Voyager mission?
On the Voyager, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course maybe they completely interact differently with systems as well. So is that when if I can read that means that they're intelligent?
Yeah. Well, remember, I think I said technologically intelligent, that has a technological skills. How would we know?
In the first place, if that guy is walking through that door, something brought him here from the other side of the planet that would make him then intelligent.
So
if
what?
you have that as a preposition, then that's maybe already done.
Well, so how would you know? Aside from the fact that he actually got here, how would you realize it? What features would a creature have to have? I mean, okay, so you didn't walk through the door. So you just found him out on the street somewhere.
Yeah, no, of course. Then if you didn't know, then that is a problem, because we are facing think it's probably already the creatures here on Earth that we can.
Absolutely, and we really don't know how intelligent they might be, but if you were to take a walk one day and you find a creature out on in the park, and you say, gee, I've never seen this creature before, is it technologically intelligent? What would you look for to give you some guidance, to let you know that it might be intelligent in a technological way? Now,
I was
hmm?
gonna say, well, all we know is our technology. So, I mean,
Okay.
for just like a cursory glance, their technology would sort of have to resemble ours, because there's that famous saying where any sufficiently advanced piece of technology is equivalent to magic.
Yes, so what,
So, I mean, it's like, if it's either way more advanced, then it's gonna look like magic. If it's way less advanced, then you're not gonna think it's technologically advanced at all. But
Sure.
at some point, you're gonna have something to compare it to in terms
Yeah.
of what we already know. So.
okay, so what do we know about a critter that could be technologically intelligent?
Well, if you saw anything like obviously mechanical that was
No,
within its hand-
just a creature sitting there. Oh, you just said it has hands.
No, I said I said in tandem.
Oh, okay.
Like mechanics working together. If it's just sitting there.
Well,
If you're going to define it as technologically intelligent, it has to be able to manipulate the environment somehow.
Right,
It has to
so
be mobile,
it's got
it has
hands.
to have tentacle hands or whatever, something that
Oh.
moves stuff.
okay, so that means it's got to have hands that can do this. It has to be able to grasp
Okay,
something.
it has to be grabbed, yeah, it has to be able to grab.
It can
Right.
be like different, just different, it's another kind of, it doesn't have to be like exactly like custom intelligence. I mean,
But-
you
but-
have another ways
Well,
to transform their environment.
Okay, but how does it manipulate? It has to be able to manipulate something,
It
right?
does have to have extremities, but like squids are very tactile as well with their suction cups and everything. They can
Okay,
still
but-
manipulate small objects. But
Right.
Not to the degree we can with fingers or anything, but I mean, it doesn't rule it out.
Okay. What kind of vision system would it need?
It wouldn't need it would just have to be able to sense the environment somehow. It'd be
It
blind.
wouldn't have to see necessarily at all,
Really?
No, not in the sense of, visual stimuli. It could be
How could it,
sonar or something.
well, all right, its sonar system would still have to have certain property,
Oh, yeah, you need some way to identify your environment.
right? It would have to be able to
It can produce and interpret waves of some
produce,
kind.
okay, but it has to be able to do that in, come on. We have a certain property, as do all hunters, and that's the ability to see in 3D. That is, we can judge depth, distance from us. It all started with hunting. You had to throw your spear, so you had to know how far to throw it and where the animal you were hunting was. So our technology, or a technological species as we know it, has to have a minimum of two things: an ability to sense in 3 dimensions, whether it's sound in 3 dimensions like dolphins do, or it's vision that we can see in 3 dimensions, or it could be a combination of the two. And it's got to be able to grasp things, to handle technology, and do something with it. Push buttons to make airplanes fly, or computer entries, or whatever. It's got to be able to do things with technologies. It's just those two features. Everything else is just helps you move around. It's legs, it's the body that contains your organs and so on. And then some minor points. The brain needs to be close to the sense organs: the eyes, the ears, your nose, and your tongue for taste and all that. But everything else is secondary to getting your input information, your eyes and your ears, and maybe your nose if you've got good sense of smell.
Yeah, but you just described a chicken.
Well, yeah, but chickens don't have manipulation. Chickens don't have hands. Chickens can't manipulate.
I've seen.
Great apes have it, yes, but they haven't developed it. The chimpanzees have developed it. They use tools. And you'd have to look at to what extent. You have to go further with the chimpanzee.
You can argue that dolphins are
They don't
advanced than chimpanzees, but they have no
they don't manipulate.
manipulation.
So they have part of the equation, but not the other part. In other words, dolphins aren't.
Necessary or sufficient.
Yeah, it's not both. I think the two are both necessary and sufficient.
And the things that
One or the other is just necessary, but not sufficient, yeah.
The other thing that's very, very crucial that chimpanzees are missing out on, but bonobos aren't, is, and what early humans and human ancestors actually had, is very strong socialization. There's an experiment where they tested chimpanzees and dogs together, taking directions from pointing gestures.
Mhm.
The dogs follow them better than the chimpanzees do because the dogs have been domesticated by humans for years and years and years and years. But the chimpanzees lack this expectation to be taught. They don't have that in their species. And if they had that, they might have the trickling down of information from one
Mhm.
generation to the next, which is what helped humans out so much.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's true. Some chimpanzee mothers teach their babies how to stick a twig into a termite mound, but it's not universal.
It's also not intentional teaching as
Mhm.
far as like, I mean, at least all the studies that I've seen, like they'll do it and the infants, the offsprings, they will observe this and they'll
Mhm.
learn to do it. But it's not, here, look at me do this, now you do this. It's not
Could be,
intentional
yeah.
teaching.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to say. How do you know there's a, like, that she's just eating and then the offspring is just watching it? I think there's cases that I would be surprised right now if there would nothing be in the animal kingdom where the parents just do it just because they can. I think rays are doing that. Like they're showing their offspring like how to do things. Like they're definitely teaching offspring. I don't know right now the chimpanzees how they do it, but
Well,
There's a lot of animals who do that, like lions will bring, big prey to the younger lions just to,
maybe just that they can catch it or something.
yeah, just to practice catch and release or something. Well, not
I
release,
think
but catch and
definitely,
try.
yeah. Again, once you throw in the ability to manipulate something, to make something out of something else, the need for opposable digits becomes critical, which, I mean, I'm sure there are some very bright animals out there, very capable brains, but they haven't got the ability to manipulate. Wolves run in packs. They do together a lot of important stuff, like hunt and feed themselves. You know, they do great things. Well, so do bears, but they're totally solitary, except when the mother is raising cubs, and she's teaching them how to survive, and then in a year or two, they go off on their own. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on that doesn't fit the expression technologically intelligent. So I give you this example to give you a sense of what you can figure out from what you already know about yourselves. You can see in 3 dimensions. I hope no one here is blind in one eye, because then I'm insulting you, but I'm willing to be politically incorrect. And the other thing is you need hands that can manipulate stuff, particularly fine manipulation. Okay, by the way, speaking of manipulating, did everyone fill out one of these releases? Because otherwise the videoing gets the lawyers all upset. So we don't want to upset lawyers.
Can I impose my thought?
Sure.
Because I thought about an answer.
Okay.
What I wrote down was not having to do with manipulation, although I knew that's what the answer is that you wanted.
I'll take any answer that works. Yeah.
The best student is trying to satisfy the professor. But language familiarity, self-awareness, free will that is beyond reflex action, to take actions that are beyond what you are hardwired to do, and all of which are some version of abstract thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all very hard to measure.
Well, of course they are. But people thought a lot about this when they sent out the Voyager. Somebody
Yeah.
mentioned the Voyager, and they put some things there, music, for example, that would be recognizable to anybody that had auditory. They had things that would be recognizable as artificial patterns for people that could sense other ways. And
They also sent out the 92 elements.
pardon?
They also sent out the 92 standard
Some
elements.
some depiction of prime numbers.
Mhm.
So there was a group of people called Saving Among Them that sat for a long time on this question and came up with how do we tell these people that well, first off, where we are, and also that we're sensing, aware, intelligent species.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those were some of the things that were tried to be depicted in the Voyager.
Yeah.
In
Well,
a very simple way.
you're absolutely correct. My question was more of, if you encountered such a being and just looking at it, how would you come about knowing that this might be?
Bees can manipulate their environment without opposable thumbs. Birds build very sophisticated nests.
Absolutely.
Watch a tilapia
Yeah,
build its nest.
yeah.
Fish,
Hmm.
and it
Yeah.
uses its mouth.
Yeah,
It uses it with some degree of dexterity.
yeah,
to-
Some birds even use tools.
sure.
Yeah.
Chimpanzees, birds, yeah,
Insects,
there's no problem.
even some insects use tools.
That's another thing, does it
Issues,
have to be
rulers.
one being? Can we have like a hive intelligence?
Hmm?
Like, you know, when highly, yeah, ants have a highly specialized society, where if you take them as a whole, it seems like they're acting as a rational thinker, but you can't use an individual ant as any sort of,
Oh, the individual ant will die.
yeah.
You know, it doesn't succeed. Anyway, I just wanted to get you all into a discussion like this. See, that's what this course is about. So continue to be prepared to take part. I won't always pose a question, but you all can pose questions. Feel free. Anyway, we're probably not going to finish this today, so perhaps be prepared to come on Thursday for the end of this production. So, how did science get started? Well, it got started because we humans have always been curious about things, and we've always been trying to get an understanding, whether we had knowledge or not, of the world around us. And from the very beginnings of humanity, somewhere between 3 and 200,000 years ago, modern humans appeared, and they had to come up with some explanation. And mostly it was an explanation of why there were human beings. Why were we here? And in each little group or tribe or gathering of humans came up with some sort of explanation for trying to explain what we didn't understand or what we couldn't understand. And usually they came up with some god or gods who would explain things. And they eventually got tired of doing nothing or rattling around in the universe, chasing one another, having godlike wars or having godlike intercourse with each other. And finally they got around to doing something. He or she would create everything. Okay? That's what gods did. And then the gods would require humans to do something in return. Okay? And what gods usually did was require that humans would sacrifice something. So here's a picture of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and the angel comes along and tells him, don't do that. God would not like it. And Abraham doesn't sacrifice Isaac. But in fact, then the people have to make prayers. And eventually, the prayers are no longer just someone going out and praying, but you have to have priests who know all the rituals and rules. And they intercede for the people with the gods. And I say that in the plural because many societies had many gods. And so the priests become very powerful and very rich. And in many societies, the priests become the real powers to whom the people and the leaders have to pay attention. But sooner or later, people begin to figure out that some things occur with regularity. That maybe the gods, if they did set up the universe, set it up so that things occurred regularly, or that maybe some things are predictable. You don't need a god to predict these things. Eclipses, sooner or later, they realize that the sun reappears. You know, it doesn't go away, it's not long, it comes back. And also, if you can count, and sooner or later people learned to count because they had to count how many people were in the tribe, how many reindeer were in that group that you were going to go and kill one and there would still be a group of reindeer or whatever. But if you could count and keep a record of your counting, you figured out that from the shortest day of the year to the next shortest day took 365 days. That was pretty important because now you knew that the year was 365 days long. Your clock had one unit of time. It was a day. and it clicked off 365 times, and you got to the next starting point. So you missed a quarter of a day. All right, you didn't care if summer was going to be in the winter or whatever, but you counted a year. The moon went from full cycle to full cycle in 28 days. That's a little better clock. Instead of a whole year, it's just 28 days long. It's not bad. Eclipses didn't occur randomly. The Babylonians could predict the eclipses of the moon with pretty good accuracy, even if they didn't know what caused them. And so they said, oh, well, God caused it, or the god of the moon, or the god of eclipses, or whatever. But they got away with it. But there were other such things called calamities and non-regularities that people had to worry about. Things like volcanoes, earthquakes, storms. Well, we have these in Florida all the time, which lead to things like floods and droughts and other such things. Like if you lived in California now, you would be, or in Flint, Michigan, you'd be worrying about where your water comes from. And many other things that really couldn't be understood back in the, whatever you want, the 10,000 or so BC period. And the common answer that was given, because we didn't know anything, was that we must have offended the gods somehow, the gods of all these things. So we invented gods of love, sun, earth, sky, oceans, rivers, rain, storms, volcanoes, and earthquakes, just to name a few. So can you name any more gods? Have we left some out?
All the planets.
Huh?
Yeah, all the planets.
All the planets? Yeah, they each got a god. Come on, think a little bit. There must be other gods.
Drinking and partying, Dionysus.
Dionysus, gods of drinking and partying. Gods of, anybody have got any suggestions?
The abstract ones, like the gods of death.
Death, yeah.
Oh, like times, trees, music,
Music.
messenger.
Messengers, yeah. There was a god of war, too.
Of course, there has to be a head of the god as well. Like,
Oh, yeah, there had to be a top god, right?
very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. God of what?
God of the gods.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, God of the gods.
God of the gods, the top god, yeah, right. Anyway, there were just a whole lot of gods, and you had to keep them all happy, or you would affront the god and you would get still more catastrophes. So, and I tell you this because you all just pointed out that this was getting to be a very heavy issue around, but also, by the way, these different gods were in different parts of the world. Different cultures had different gods, and when they butted up against each other, they found themselves fighting with each other because they believed in different gods. And if one conquered the other, they had to force their gods onto the other person's gods. Or they adopted their gods, which is sort of what Rome did when it conquered Greece. They just kind of changed the names and wound up with the same kinds of gods. But that kind of thought war went on pretty often. Now the question was there science before the Greeks? Because we're going to get to the Greeks in a few minutes, because a lot of the fundamental basis of science takes place in ancient Greece, and that's what I'm hoping to get to sooner or later. Anyway, humankind's been around for more or less 200,000 years, modern humans, Homo sapien. And they had to do something in all that time, and so we're going to try to list some of the achievements, starting with making fire. That was key. You know, from making fire, two things came out. One is the fire kept attacking animals away from coming into the humans' caves. Big doings. It meant you could survive longer. Okay, kept the wolves out, the bears and so on. They didn't like fire at night. And the other was it let you cook your food.
It's easier for people to digest.
That's right, exactly. If you could cook your food, it's easier to eat it. It's easier to digest. Right, and you could get lots of energy from all that protein that you could cook now and eat. Absolutely critical. Great, great. And stone tools, okay? Stone tools, the first stone tools looked like nothing more than, they're called rock hammers. They're just a rock, but you could tell from the shape of them and the fact that there's finger marks and such on them that they were used as hammers to pound things, whatever they were pounding, I don't know. But then somebody got the bright idea of chipping the edge of a stone off and getting a sharp edge on it so you could use it to scrape things, okay? And then someone got an even brighter idea of chipping off the edges on both sides, the top and bottom, and you could make a pretty good stone knife. And that was amazingly important, because with a stone knife you could make stone spearheads. And now you had a really great tool for hunting. And that opened up the potential for the Homo sapiens. Well, anyway, we'll get to that in a second. But here, around 28,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, somebody picked up a bone and carved a sharp, large line, 27 little ones and another large line, 27 more little ones, another large line, and 14 more little ones. That's 2.5 lunar months. And the other bones on which they carved more of them were missing. But when the archaeologists found this, they were amazed that 30,000 years ago, somebody was keeping track of the moon's calendar. It mattered a lot to the people who did this. These were cave dwellings. These people were still living in caves 30,000 years ago. And they were keeping track of the moon's calendar. Well, why do you think they were doing that? Any thoughts? If you were living in a cave 30,000 years ago, why would you keep track of the of the calendar? Yeah.
A lot of animals respond to the lunar calendar in terms of like breeding and
Speak up. That's absolutely right.
so it would have affected how they hunted.
Absolutely correct. It affects when you need to know when the herds come back. You need to know when they're going to leave, and you need to know when they come back. You need to know when it's going to be winter, so you can lay in a stock of food for the bad times of the year, and so on. So the calendar, keeping record of time, is crucial. And there it is, the first clock.
I mean, you want to hunt,
Huh?
like, if you want, you can hunt at night on a full moon because it's bright out.
Exactly. That's another reason they may have done it. But for sure, they wanted to know, hey, we in this month we hunted the reindeer, and 13 of these things later, the reindeer were back, or the deer, or whatever it was they were hunting. And yes, it's a bright night. This is a good night for hunting.
These species use lunar cycles to judge their feeding cycles as well as breeding cycles.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather used to tell me about going fishing when the moon was right.
Mhm.
It turns out that it does matter. If there's an ascending moon, fish are fighting much better than if there's a descending moon.
Excellent.
They've adjusted their feeding patterns to be able to feed at night.
And they may even have figured out that the number of months of pregnancy needs to be counted too, to know when the pregnant woman needs to be put in the place where people go to give birth. I don't know, but there are a lot of things that you need to keep track of. But keeping records is something important to a small group of people living in a cave. Largely records of when are the animals going to come back. But what else were they doing? Well, as I said, they were making stone arrowheads or spear tips. These are remarkably sharp. You don't want to get hit with one of those. Some people say they're sharper than you can make in metal. Now, here's something that's truly fascinating. Have any of you not heard of the Lascaux cave paintings? Or is there anyone here that didn't hear about them?
The other one in France?
Yes, in France. In the cave near Lascaux in France, deep inside the cave, some 400 or 500 feet deep in the cave, where there is no light. If you want to have light, you have to carry a flashlight in. On the walls of the cave are these marvelous and beautiful paintings done some 14 or 15,000 years ago. And you have to imagine that the people that did this had to carry, a flaming torch into the cave, climb all the way in there, squeeze through passageways, go in there and make these beautiful paintings, and no one was going to see them. What purpose could that have had? Yeah.
I was actually watching a
Even older,
And
yeah.
they're able to recognize different artists and also have like layers of paintings that are like 5,000 years apart.
Oh, wow. So in all cases, this was not for public display. This was being done on the wall of a cave, probably as maybe similar to the paintings in cathedrals around the world, as a statement for whatever, to bring back these animals or to keep them in good number for the people to be able to hunt and get. But the general public, who was still 450 or so feet outside, never went back here to see these paintings, only the painters. So it's a monumental task to make those paintings, and people were doing it. Some as old as 30,000 years. Thank you. Okay, another thing people were starting to do was domesticating animals. Cows are not natural. The natural version of a cow was a thing called an aurochs, which was very, very difficult and dangerous to have. Also, they got around to inventing the wheel. It had to be invented. It didn't just appear naturally. And then here are some Egyptian hieroglyphics, a way of writing down and keeping records. I don't know whether, well, I don't really know the time when this was done, but it was probably around 6,000 or 7,000 BC, somewhere around 8,000 years ago. At about the same time, in Persia or Babylon, if you will, people were inventing cuneiform, which is a bunch of little triangles with little slashes written in. So that was close to an alphabetic language. But here, the Egyptians took it a big step further. They built these fantastic buildings, not only the pyramids, but a statuary and cities and so on. So this is around 7,000 years ago, 5,000 BC. And hey, this is what finally started. The Bronze Age. Tools, we've come from stone tools to metal tools. These tools are what let these things be built. Even if bronze is a pretty soft metal, it's hard enough to let you chip and shape the stones that were used in building those pyramids. And then we come to, in some time, and I don't know when, the Greek alphabet. You've all seen some of those letters, you use them in scientific notation and what have you, but that's the whole Greek alphabet. There were several other alphabets around at the time, and eventually it evolves into what we call the Latin alphabet, and that we use today.
It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Oh, should I go back?
The Americans, primitive people, did not have domesticated, well, did not have beasts of burden,
Yeah,
nor did they have a wheel.
that's right. They had no need for it. The need developed in places where you needed to move stuff from one place to another. In the Americas, in the mountainous countries, you know, they had people running on trails. The way they communicated in the South American countries, there were mountainous trails that they ran along.
They just have the entire Andes network of trails that all the messengers would run on between the different cities.
Yeah. Even if you had horses and wheeled transport, you couldn't use them on those in that kind of area.
There, but North America was also,
Yeah, North America was
yeah.
a big
Well,
empty
my
plain.
point being that we need to be careful as we try to recognize in others signs of intelligence that not all solutions are found to be the same.
Well, yeah, but I guess the point is that the solutions, these things that constitute solutions, are solutions. You don't solve problems that you don't need solved. And if you're living fat and sassy, chasing buffalo and using their hides to make your tents, and you know how to make fire, and you can make pretty good tools and so on, you're not motivated to make a wheel because you don't have anyone to pull the cart with the wheel on, anything to pull the wheel, the cart. And, you know, if the buffalo provide you with the bison provide you with everything you need, why, and you can't tame a bison, why bother? In other words, you got to look at the psychology of who's working these problems. And that's part of the story of human development. In some parts of the world, you need to solve certain problems, and you solve them. Human intelligence lets you do that. But if you don't have to solve a problem like, whatever, building pyramids, you don't. However, go to Mexico City, and just outside it, there's this fabulous city of Teotihuacan. If there's a person from Mexico in here, yeah. Okay, I must have mangled the pronunciation, but yeah, but it's a beautiful city, and it's a pyramid every bit as spectacular as those. And the whole city around it is spectacular. I don't know whether it was built comparably in time or later, but when you,
It was much later.
around the same time or later?
It was much later.
Later. But again, when they got around to wanting to solve that problem, they got around and they did it. Okay? Yeah.
So, can I understand as when people want to know more about this world, learn more regularities, or would they want to drive the nature's route into another one, into a more beneficial to human beings route? Can this be defined as science?
That's what we're going to...
Or maybe that's just survival, and survival is different from science.
Well, that's what we're going to follow now. We're going to see how it becomes science. Okay? Because right now, and at this stage, humans, see here, it's accumulating technologies. Okay, that's what this question is. Was all of this science or an accumulation of technologies? And you're right to ask the question.
There is an example that I'm aware of called Chaco Canyon.
Yeah.
It's in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico, where people, pre-European, developed very sophisticated calendars and measurements that went well beyond. Of course, they determined things to determine the equinox and the calendar and the lunar cycles, but they determined lunar cycles that were 18 plus years separated, that far exceed the practical things of knowing when you can hunt at night and so forth. But these are very subtle cycles of the moon that I think is only based on curiosity and observation, and they did all this without a written language.
Yeah. And the Aztec calendar was determined with cycles that ran for, correct me if I'm wrong, 5,700 and some odd years.
Yeah.
And there was no sense in it because no one was ever going to exist for 5,700 and some years to see if it worked. But they had a cycle that ran that long, and then a new cycle would begin.
But I think a key question, though, is certainly need develops, need is the mother of all invention, or whatever. Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
But I think the advance of humanity was to go a step beyond need to just curiosity.
Yeah.
Maybe initially driven by need, but once the need is satisfied, then we keep doing something else.
Well, indeed. That's what we'll see when, for example, with metallurgy, people had made bronze, which is tin and copper, and somebody probably said, oh, wait a minute, I've got this other thing here. It's not too good, but it's iron. And when I do make it, it's a lot harder than this stuff. Oh, maybe I can do something with it. And lo and behold, not too long after that, the Iron Age begins. Okay? And that changes the game for everybody. Okay? You don't know where that genius is going to come from. And it's unpredictable. It's unpredictable. You can't predict it. It happened in the Middle East. It happened in China. It happened in several places. And by the way, don't anyone tell you that the military-industrial complex doesn't exist. It has existed throughout time. Okay? People need an army. They tell people to go make arms for the army, and somebody makes an iron or a steel sword, and that enhances their army. And that is what it's about. So anyway, here's an example. You make bronze swords, I can make an iron or a steel sword that's a whole lot better than these guys, and I'm going to win the battle. Okay? That's the story of history. Well, anyway, so is this science or an accumulation of technologies? It could be both. Making metals like that takes a tremendous accumulation of knowledge. How much tin do I mix in with the copper to make bronze? So somebody is storing up that information and passing it on to his acolytes and his sons and daughters, and so they can keep the business in the family. But then the guy down the street learns how to make iron and puts these guys out of business. Okay? And then he starts to go, oh, I put a little carbon in there and I can make it even harder. It's called steel. Yeah, and on it goes. And that competition drives, sooner or later, you get steel industries that can produce massive ships and such. So it becomes a science of making the metal and a technology of making something with the metal. So
There's a much bigger hump between, getting from, stone tools to bronze tools compared to like bronze tools to basically, whatever the next step is, iron, steel,
sure.
whatever. You could stumble on a rock and create a spearhead out of that just by looking at it and say, ow, I cut my foot. But
Yeah.
At what level of societal excess can you get some crazy guy to sit in a shack all day and melt metal until it becomes useful?
It's a good question. I wish I knew the answer. It's a very good question.
Like, what kind of society do you
Yeah. How much extra food and time and freedom can one man have in order to be able to sit in his house all day, not worry about hunting, just melting metal together until he finds a good
That's why
combination?
it took such a long time, because
It's a matter of a lot of time, yeah.
And if I may, like, a lot of that stuff was probably done by accident, where you had societies where people put rocks by fire because you put it there for a while and it gets nice and warm, you can take it to bed with you and it keeps you warm at night. You do that enough times, you get one hot enough and you see, what the heck is this shiny stuff leaking out of it now? Now you're,
Okay, so someone accidentally took ore near the fire pit. Even so, how hot do you need that to be? Like, that's yeah.
although it's surprisingly easy to make like crucible and everything, like.
Yeah, it's very easy to make
It's
copper.
very hard to make a fire that melts metal.
Yeah,
Make a
no,
fire that melts glass.
Especially something like tin and copper.
copper is easy to melt. Copper is very easy to make.
And you discover steel because you get coal into the fire that you're using to soften the metal to make it into a shape, and
Someone had to be laying down on the job. Someone had to have very poor standards of cleanliness and purity in their metals in order to get that done.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's an accident that you get something interesting, and it takes you a long time to figure out what the accident was.
probably the first sharp tool was when they had a round tool that broke off and
It was a
it was sharp and it kind of was better than.
Yeah. Yeah, before they made this kind of stone tool, they probably just accidentally broke off a piece of a stone hammer and found, oh, that's a nice scraper. Gee, I can use that. And so they started breaking off the edges of stone hammers to make stone scrapers, and from there a stone industry was born. But the point is, the time scale is huge. From this, which is maybe 15, 20,000 years ago, to that is 15,000 years. That's a lot of time. From here to now is just about 3,000 years. Okay, and from what we'll call the beginning of modern science to now is only 2,000 years. Okay, so it's a tiny bit. 1% of the existence of modern man is when science exists. Today is really, and with the rate we're going, today and Thursday is going to be how we get to the starting point. Okay? Because up to now, nobody really realizes what's going on. That's why this question is here. Okay? There's no organization yet. Nobody's talking to one another. As we just discussed, this guy over here is making bronze. He's not telling anyone. That guy over there is fiddling around with iron. It's a little bit harder than that stuff. My assistant made a mistake and got some carbon in the fire. And lo and behold, this is harder. It's important stuff. Okay, so what else did we do, or what was done to us? This is rather important. Wolves domesticated us. It's always said the other way around, but actually wolves, the less timid of the wolves began to nibble around at our garbage dumps. They came up and they ate the stuff we threw away. And as they got less timid of us, because we usually would kill a wolf if it came up close, the less timid of them came around and, we threw something to them and ate it, and he was less afraid. And eventually, and in about one human generation, in East Asia, about 15,000 years ago, no one's quite sure where, the wolves got to where they stayed around long enough to become dogs in about one generation, and without dogs, we would not have populated the earth as well as we have. Why? Because the dog protected us against the wolves. The dogs barked when the wolves were coming. They woke us up. We ran out and chased away the wolves. They also barked when other bad features were coming, and they did good stuff, and that gives me an excuse to show you my beautiful dog, Sylvia. And she's a treeing walker hound. She doesn't know how to tree or chase or smell anything except food, but she's of that. I got her at the Humane Society. I didn't have any idea that she was actually a breed, but eventually we discovered it. Anyway, in other ancient cultures, the first city-states, if you have a city and you've got a lot of people living in a small area, you need plumbing. You need to give them water, unlike Flint, Michigan, and you got to remove the waste.
But wasn't that kind of hit and miss on the first few cities, especially since I know a lot of early American societies had plumbing before the old world had plumbing.
Yeah.
And we actually went without certain kinds of plumbing for a longer time than really was necessary.
Yeah.
I think we actually had plumbing in Rome and then lost it at one point.
That's right, absolutely. The Roman cities had good plumbing and good waste removal. They had rather strange bathrooms, or if you ever go to Italy, you'll see what the bathrooms were like. They were communal events where you could sit down and have a conversation with your neighbor and all of that. In Mexico, there were much effort was spent on waste removal in Mexico City. Throughout the world, plumbing was a big confused issue. You can't really have a thriving city, a thriving population, if you don't take care of this. It's fundamentally important. In fact, in London, cholera was common because they didn't get rid of the waste. The water was terrible. You couldn't drink the water no matter where you were. If you go to the Tower of London, they'll show you where the royalty and the dukes and the earls used to defecate. I hate to turn this into a gross sort of discussion, but they used to defecate through an opening in the side of the building, and then they had lower class people come and clean it up. I mean, that was the highest class of cleansing in 14th century England. It's a terrible thing to say, but it took a while till humankind realized how important that was. But many city-states did realize it, and they thrived. Anyway, if you're going to have a city-state, you have to keep records. Who paid taxes? Okay? How much grain does this family use? How much beer do they get? You can't drink the water, you got to get beer. I was in China recently, and I was informed that nobody in China drinks the tap water, so you drink bottled water. So how much water do you get, and all that? Growing of crops in irrigated plots, that started quite early in both China and Egypt. Egypt, it was a natural because you had the Nile flowing down, and when it spilled over the banks, it enriched the soil, and then you took the water and you irrigated your plots with it. And in China, the same thing for growing rice. It was a beautiful idea, but you had to manage the water flow and minimize the flooding, but you had to allow it to enrich the soil. So a lot of knowledge was accumulating on how to properly do your agriculture. It was a great deal. There was also trading on the rivers, because that's a great way to get from one place to another. Much better than traveling over land. meant you could move your crops in the boats, and you could bring other product back if you wanted to. But since you had gold and silver now, by the way, when we're talking about metals, gold and silver are much easier to get out of ore than copper or the other metals. These are very low melting point metals. So since you could do that, you could trade the worth of something for the worth of something. So now you had the beginning of bookkeeping, accounting, and the mathematics that goes with it. It was not yet double entry bookkeeping, but it was at least record keeping. And the very, very tiny, faint beginning of banking. It wouldn't really happen until the Middle Ages, but it was the beginning. Yeah, do you have a question over there? Oh, okay. All right, where are we? We've got 5 minutes left. And let's see. Whoops, go back one. You know what? This is actually a stopping point, if you're all willing to come back on Thursday. Okay, is there anyone who won't come back on Thursday? Oh, all right. So let's go. Do you mind if we just go on and see how far we can get?
Sure.
All right. We'll see if anyone else comes in. All right. Well, we'll keep going. Okay. So, in the beginning, about 9,000 years ago, you get your first written languages. And that's, I was just saying, record keeping, giving out bread and beer. In 600 BC, Thales suggests that things may follow consistent principles that humans could figure out. Do you recognize that?
That's the first assumption of science.
That's the fundamental underpinning of science. It occurs roughly 2,600 years ago. This is the concept of science. And I'm going to move a little faster. The first modern humans appeared about 200,000 years ago, so we've only had 1% of our time to do it, and you can see how far we've come. So all of this stuff went on that we've been talking about. This body of knowledge could be called science, but it was not a connected body of knowledge yet. People in the world had not really communicated with each other. So let's look at what passes for science in ancient Greece. Thales does his thing, and about 300 years later, Aristotle points it out and expands on it. We're going to talk a lot about Aristotle because for almost 2,000 years, his model of the universe holds sway because it sort of works, but it's wrong. His model of the universe has the sun at the center, has the earth at the center and the sun going around the earth. Anyway, Thales' idea was that complex events could be explained in terms of simpler events and eventually in terms of general principles. And here's the big to-do. You don't need gods, you just need human intelligence. That's a huge break philosophically in the way things had been done before. Now, rational thinking and the use of logic is what makes this go. This is a major milestone in human thought. It's possible to understand what before had been left to the gods. It's a rational approach that allowed the Greeks to reach many conclusions that seem to be very much the basis of science, as we just said. Now, the first bit of mathematical formulation to come from this approach is the Pythagorean theorem. I bet you didn't know that. Anybody know that that's the first theoretical physics expression ever? He's relating three measured quantities to one another, and that's